This is every major American fighter of the Second World War, ranked worst to best. Starting with the worst American fighter. Number 10. Brewster F-2A Buffalo. The machine that humiliated America. The Buffalo was supposed to be America's first serious carrier-based monoplane fighter. It looked modern on paper in 1939, but combat exposed it as one of the worst decisions the Navy ever made. By the time it reached Pacific service, it was already obsolete. Underpowered, overweight, and dangerously slow to climb. The Buffalo couldn't outrun, outturn, or outlast the Japanese Zero in any meaningful way. At the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Marine pilots flew Buffaloes against experienced Japanese aviators. The results were catastrophic. Of the pilots who engaged that day, the majority didn't come back. One Marine commander, Major Parks, was killed leading his squadron into a zero formation in a Buffalo. His aircraft didn't give him a fighting chance. Finland, ironically, used the Buffalo with some success against Soviet aircraft in 1940. But against Japan's elite fighter pilots, it was a death sentence with wings. This is where the ranking opens, with a machine that failed the men who flew it. Number 9. Bell P-39 Airacobra. The P-39 Airacobra looked incredible. Sleek, modern, with that unusual mid-fuselage engine placement and a 37mm cannon firing directly through the propeller hub. On the ground, it turned heads. In the air above 15,000 feet, it could get you killed. Bell had designed it without a turbo supercharger. That decision stripped the Airacobra of its ability to perform at high altitude, exactly where most combat in Europe was happening. When the RAF tested it in 1941, they rejected it immediately and returned their order to America. American pilots flying it over Europe found themselves at a fatal disadvantage. The aircraft's handling degraded dangerously at altitude, and the engine placement shifted the center of gravity in ways that made it prone to a deadly flat spin that pilots couldn't always recover from. The Soviet Air Force, flying low-altitude ground support missions on the Eastern Front, actually found it useful. The Soviets received over 4,700 P-39s through Lend-Lease. In that role, close to the Earth, it performed. But at altitude, it belonged on the ground. A fighter with this many theater-specific limitations ranks near the bottom. It was a conditional aircraft in an unconditional war. Number 8. Curtiss P-36 Hawk. The P-36 Hawk entered service in 1938. By December 7, 1941, the morning Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, it was already a relic. And yet there it was, scrambled into the sky over Oahu alongside modern aircraft, trying to intercept Japanese Zeros. It couldn't catch them. It couldn't outfight them. But in a grotesque historical footnote, the P-36 actually scored the first American aerial victories of the Pacific War that morning, 2 Japanese aircraft downed by pilots who somehow coaxed something out of a machine that had no business being in that fight. The P-36 was outclassed by virtually every frontline fighter it encountered in combat. France ordered it in large numbers and flew it against the Luftwaffe during the Battle of France in 1940, suffering heavy losses despite some individual acts of courage. It had charm, it had heart, and the pilots who flew it early in the war deserved better. As a wartime fighter, it was already living on borrowed time. Number 7. Bell P-63 King Cobra. Bell corrected many of the P-39's worst flaws with the P-63 King Cobra. Better engine, better performance, better handling. On paper, it was a real improvement. The problem, by the time it arrived, American aviation had already moved past it. The P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt were dominating the skies. The Army Air Forces had no real operational need for the P-63 as a frontline fighter. The vast majority, over 3,000 of them, were shipped directly to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease, where they saw legitimate combat. American pilots barely flew it in combat. The most unusual use? The U.S. employed a heavily armored version of the P-63 as a manned target aircraft, live pilots flying it while other pilots shot at it with frangible bullets that shattered on impact rather than penetrating. They called them pinball aircraft. A fighter whose primary American wartime role was being shot at by its own side ranks exactly where it belongs. Number 6. Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. Here's where the ranking gets complicated. Because the P-40 Warhawk wasn't a bad aircraft, it was a compromised one. And sometimes in the brutal mathematics of wartime, a compromised aircraft is what you have. The P-40 was rugged. It could absorb punishment. It was available when nothing better was ready. The Flying Tigers of the American Volunteer Group flew it against Japanese aircraft over Burma and China starting in late 1941, using slashing hit-and-run tactics that exploited the P-40's diving speed and avoided turning combat. It couldn't win. But the truth is that the P-40 was outclassed in a straight fight by nearly every major Axis fighter it encountered. The Zero outturned it. The Bf-109 and FW-190 outperformed it at altitude. It couldn't climb fast enough. It struggled above 15,000 feet. Where it survived was at low altitude, in the hands of tactically disciplined pilots who understood its limits and never asked it to be something it wasn't. That discipline saved lives. The aircraft itself remained a second-tier machine for most of the war. Tough, available, outmatched. That's the P-40's honest epitaph. Number 5. Grumman F-4F Wildcat. In early 1942, the Grumman F-4F Wildcat was the only carrier-based fighter the United States Navy had, and it was fighting the Japanese Zero. Let that sink in. The Zero was faster. It climbed faster. It turned tighter. It had a longer range. On nearly every performance metric, the Zero was superior to the Wildcat, and Japan's pilots were battle-hardened veterans from the war in China. The Wildcat survived because of what the Zero didn't have. The Zero's designers had stripped it of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks to achieve its extraordinary performance. One or two good hits on a Zero could set it ablaze. The Wildcat, by contrast, was built like a piece of American industrial stubbornness, armored, protected, and hard to kill. American pilots adopted the Thatch Weave, a defensive tactic developed by Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch, which allowed two Wildcats to cover each other against Zero attacks. Teamwork compensated for what the machine couldn't. At Guadalcanal at Midway, during the darkest hours of 1942, the Wildcat held the line until something better could arrive. That earns it respect, but also underscores why it lands here. It was never quite enough on its own. Number 4. Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The P-38 Lightning was unlike anything flying in any Air Force in 1942. Twin engines, twin booms, a central gondola, it looked like science fiction. And its potential was extraordinary. But early variants nearly killed the concept before it could deliver on its promise. The engines, Allison V-1710s, were magnificent at altitude in the Pacific. In the cold skies over Europe, they were a different story. Pilots reported cockpits so cold that hands froze on controls. Compressibility problems at high speed made the aircraft nearly uncontrollable in dives. The engines had a horrifying tendency to fail during the low-throttle approaches required for formation flying across the English Channel. Pilots died. Missions were lost. In the Mediterranean and European theaters during 1942 and 43, the early P-38 was a machine you respected and feared, not always for the right reasons. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, called it the aircraft he feared most when he saw it over Germany. But that was later, when the problems had been solved. In the early war over Europe, it was a machine of tremendous promise that hadn't yet earned its reputation. It earns higher ranking for its ultimate ceiling and falls short of the top because the path to get there costs lives that shouldn't have been spent. Number 3. Vought F-4U Corsair, Early Naval Service. The F-4U Corsair had the most powerful piston engine installed in any American fighter at the time of its introduction. It was faster than anything flying off American carriers in 1942. By every measure, it should have been the Navy's premier carrier fighter immediately. Instead, the Navy initially declared it unsuitable for carrier operations. The reason? The Corsair's long nose, a consequence of a massive engine up front, made forward visibility on carrier approaches dangerously poor. The aircraft had a vicious left-wing stall and a bouncing landing gear that made carrier landings genuinely hazardous. Early production Corsairs were also plagued by oil leaking onto the cockpit windshield. The Marine Corps took it instead and used it from land bases, where it became devastating. Marine ace Gregory Pappy Boyington flew Corsairs with VMF 214, the Black Sheep Squadron, becoming one of the war's most decorated pilots. The Royal New Zealand Air Force worked out carrier landing techniques the U.S. Navy hadn't cracked yet, and eventually convinced the Americans the Corsair could work at sea. It was too good to stay at the bottom for long. But its difficult berth earns it this ranking over the more immediately reliable machines that follow. Number 2. Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver. The SB-2C Helldiver was a dive bomber, not a pure fighter, but it flew escort missions, it engaged enemy aircraft, and it won the Pacific Air War's most critical battles. So it earns its place here. And almost everyone in naval aviation loathed it. Pilots called it the Beast. Mechanics cursed it. It handled poorly, had endless production problems, and took years of corrections before it approached reliability. The original design required over 880 engineering changes before the Navy accepted it. But here's the brutal truth. It sank Japanese warships. It hit targets the older Douglas SBD Dauntless couldn't reach as efficiently. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot of June 1944, Helldivers played a central role in destroying Japanese carrier aviation as a strategic force. It wasn't pretty. Pilots didn't love it, but it delivered. And in war, delivery is what history remembers. A machine that everyone hated and everyone needed sits in an uncomfortable middle ground in this ranking. Not the worst, not the best, just essential. Number 1, Fisher P-75 Eagle. This wasn't just America's worst World War II fighter, it was one of the biggest procurement failures of the war. In 1942, General Motors Fisher Body Division, a company with no fighter design experience, promised the U.S. Army Air Forces a long-range escort fighter by combining parts from existing aircraft. On paper, it looked like a fast solution. Reality was very different. The P-75 proved dangerously unstable, suffered serious handling problems, and failed to deliver the long range it was designed for. Test flights resulted in crashes, including the loss of a test pilot, while surviving pilots described the aircraft as unpredictable and difficult to control. Despite these problems, the Army had already ordered 2,500 aircraft before the prototype had properly proven itself. After wasting nearly 2 years and millions of dollars, the entire program was canceled in late 1943 without a single combat deployment. While the P-75 consumed valuable time and resources, American bombers continued flying deep into Germany without adequate escort, suffering heavy losses until the P-51 Mustang finally filled the role. The Fisher P-75 Eagle didn't just fail as a fighter. It failed as one of the greatest procurement mistakes of World War II, earning its place at the very bottom of this ranking. Now we enter a completely different class of fighter. Yes, this is the best American fighter. Number 10, Northrop P-61 Black Widow. Most fighters fought in daylight. The P-61 Black Widow owned the night. The first American aircraft specifically designed as a night fighter from the ground up, the Black Widow carried an airborne radar system capable of detecting enemy aircraft in total darkness. Its crew of 3, pilot, gunner, radar operator, turned it into a flying ambush. It was enormous by fighter standards. At nearly 50 feet wingspan and over 30,000 pounds loaded, it dwarfed conventional fighters. 4 20mm cannons in a ventral mount and 4.50 caliber guns in a dorsal turret gave it enough firepower to destroy anything it found. And it found things. Over the Pacific and in the European theater of operations, P-61 crews hunted Japanese and German aircraft in conditions where nothing else could even see. Some crews reported kills that were essentially invisible from the ground, a flash in the darkness, a fire falling. It ranks here because its specialized role limited its broader contribution. But as a purpose-built night predator, nothing the Americans flew came close. Number 9, Republic P-47 Thunderbolt Early. When the P-47 Thunderbolt first arrived in Europe in 1943, Luftwaffe pilots who intercepted it had a question. What is that thing? It weighed over 7 tons fully loaded. It was the largest and heaviest single-engine fighter of the entire war. Against the nimble Bf-109 and FW-190, it looked like a fat target. It wasn't. The Thunderbolt could dive faster than anything in the Luftwaffe could follow. At altitude, its supercharged R-2800 engine produced power that German fighters couldn't match. 8.50 caliber machine guns created a wall of fire that destroyed anything they hit. And the airframe? It was almost indestructible. Stories of P-47s returning to base with catastrophic damage, entire engine cylinders shot away, control surfaces torn off, became legend. Early deployment suffered from limited range. Without drop tanks, it couldn't escort bombers deep into Germany. That limitation placed it below where it ultimately belonged in history. But as a machine of pure, terrifying capability, the Thunderbolt announced something important to the Luftwaffe. America had learned how to build fighters. Number 8, Grumman F-6F Hellcat. After the disaster of early Pacific combat, the U.S. Navy sat down and asked a single question. What does it take to beat the Zero? The answer was the Grumman F-6F Hellcat. Grumman's engineers reverse-engineered the Zero's strengths and designed around them. Better armor, more firepower, enough speed and climb performance to compete. The R-2800 double wasp engine, the same power plant in the Thunderbolt, gave it performance no Carrier Base Zero could match by 1943. The numbers tell the story. The Hellcat achieved a kill ratio of 19-1 against Japanese aircraft over the course of the war. Hellcat pilots shot down 5,163 enemy aircraft, over 75% of all Navy aerial victories in the Pacific. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Hellcat pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot because the Japanese aircraft fell like they'd flown into a trap. The trap was called the Hellcat. It was never the most elegant aircraft, but elegant wasn't the point. Destroying the Japanese carrier air arm was the point. Mission accomplished. Number 7. Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Once Lockheed solved the P-38's early problems, improved cockpit heating, engine reliability in cold weather, a dive flap to control compressibility, what emerged was arguably the most versatile American fighter of the entire war. It was the only American fighter with the range to escort bombers deep into contested airspace in both Europe and the Pacific simultaneously. Ace Richard Bong, America's top-scoring fighter pilot of the war with 40 confirmed kills, flew P-38s exclusively. Major Tommy Maguire, second only to Bong with 38 kills, flew nothing else. But the P-38's most decisive individual mission came on April 18, 1943. American codebreakers intercepted the flight itinerary of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, who was flying an inspection tour over the Solomon Islands. 16 P-38s from Henderson Field flew 400 miles at wave-top height in radio silence, intercepted Yamamoto's transport exactly as planned, and shot it down over Bougainville. Admiral Yamamoto, the greatest naval strategist Japan possessed, died in that jungle. The P-38 did it. That single mission belongs to the history of the war, not just to aviation history. Number 6. Vought F for you Corsair. Once the Corsair's carrier landing problems were solved and it matured into its full potential, something remarkable emerged, a fighter so dominant that Japanese pilots developed a specific fear response to its distinctive engine sound and gull-wing silhouette. They called it Whistling Death. The Corsair's R-2800 engine gave it a top speed of 446 miles per hour, faster than any Japanese fighter it regularly encountered. Its firepower, 6.50 caliber machine guns, could destroy aircraft, strafe airfields, and sink small vessels with equal efficiency. With external fuel tanks, it had the range to escort bombers across vast Pacific distances. Marine aces like Joe Foss and Gregory "Pappy" Boyington built their legends in Corsairs. The aircraft served through Korea and remained in frontline military service with some nations into the 1960s. The Corsair didn't just win individual dogfights. It won air superiority over entire island chains. When Japanese pilots heard that sound, that particular whistle from the cowling, the tactical calculus of whatever they were doing changed immediately. That kind of psychological impact belongs near the top of any ranking. Number 5. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. With drop tanks finally solving the range problem, the mature P-47 Thunderbolt transformed from a capable high-altitude interceptor into something the Luftwaffe genuinely dreaded, a ground attack weapon of almost unlimited destructive capacity. German troops called low-flying P-47s Jabos, a shortened German term for fighter bombers, and the word carried real dread. A column of German armor moving through France in 1944 could be destroyed before a single ground engagement occurred. Supply lines, rail yards, fuel depots, bridges. The P-47 pilots of the 9th Air Force dismantled the German Army's ability to fight by destroying everything it needed to move. The aircraft's legendary toughness made this possible. Flying at low altitude against intense ground fire was suicidal for fragile aircraft. The Thunderbolt absorbed flak, kept flying, and came home. Stories of P-47s landing with complete engine cylinders missing, their oil systems dry, and their hydraulics shot out were not exceptional, they were routine. Over 15,000 P-47s were built. It destroyed more ground targets in the European theater than any other Allied aircraft. By the war's end, it wasn't just a fighter, it was a mobile artillery platform with wings and an attitude problem. Number 4. North American P-51B Sea Mustang. By the winter of 1943, the American strategic bombing campaign over Germany was failing. Heavy bombers were flying deep into the Reich without adequate fighter escort. The missions to Schweinfurt alone 2 raids in the fall of 1943 cost 120 bombers and over 1,000 airmen. The 8th Air Force was bleeding itself dry. The answer arrived in early 1944 with the Rolls-Royce Merlin-powered P-51B Mustang. A marriage of American airframe with British engineering genius produced something neither country could have built alone, a fighter with the range to fly from England to Berlin and back, while still being fast and maneuverable enough to fight Luftwaffe interceptors at altitude. The moment long-range P-51s appeared over Germany, everything changed. German pilots, who had been destroying bombers with relative impunity, suddenly found themselves hunted by a fighter they couldn't shake and couldn't outrun. General Karl Spaatz, commanding the American Strategic Air Forces, said simply, "The P-51 saved the bomber offensive." Without it, the daylight bombing campaign over Germany might have been abandoned. With it, America carried the war to the German heartland and kept it there until the end. One aircraft, that much strategic weight. That's not performance, that's history. Number 3. North American P-51D Mustang. The P-51D was the P-51B's design made perfect. The bubble canopy replaced the old greenhouse hood, giving pilots 360-degree visibility that earlier variants couldn't offer. The armament was standardized at 6.50 caliber machine guns. The airframe was refined. The result was an aircraft that could be described with a single word by the men who flew against it: dangerous. At altitude, the BF-109 and FW-190 couldn't outclimb it, couldn't outrun it, and in the hands of an experienced American pilot, couldn't outturn it. The P-51D flew so far that Luftwaffe pilots began encountering at places they had never expected to see American fighters, over Prague, over Vienna, escorting bombers to targets deep in occupied Europe. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe's fighter force was running out of experienced pilots. The P-51D's presence over Germany had transformed escort missions from desperate defensive actions into coordinated hunts. American commanders ordered fighters to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found, in the air, on its airfields, in its maintenance areas. The P-51D didn't just escort bombers. It dismantled an air force. At this point in history, that belongs in the top 3. Number 2. Grumman F-8F Bearcat. The F-8F Bearcat was Grumman's answer to a single question. What if we stripped everything unnecessary from the Hellcat and focused entirely on performance? The result was extraordinary. The Bearcat could climb from sea level to 10,000 feet in 94 seconds, faster than any production propeller aircraft before or since. Its rate of roll was phenomenal. Its acceleration was startling. Everything Japan had deployed in the Pacific, the Zero, the Ki, 84, the Shidenkai, would have met something they couldn't match. It arrived too late. VJ Day came before the Bearcat flew combat missions. The aircraft it was built to destroy had already been destroyed, not by superior fighters, but by industrial strangulation and nuclear weapons. History is cruel that way. The Bearcat served post-war with the French Navy in Indochina, where it flew ground attack missions against Viet Minh forces. It set speed records. It flew air racing circuits into the 1970s. Pilots who flew it called it the most exciting machine they'd ever sat in. As the pinnacle of American propeller-driven fighter design, it belongs here, at the edge of the very best, just short of the aircraft that actually changed the war. Number 1. North American P-51D Mustang. No aircraft on this list accomplished what the P-51 Mustang accomplished. None. It arrived at the moment the American bombing campaign was on the verge of collapse, and it reversed that collapse. It gave the 8th Air Force its eyes, its shield, and its sword simultaneously. It outperformed every Luftwaffe piston engine fighter it regularly encountered, and it flew combat missions from England to Berlin, a distance of over 1,100 miles round trip, while still retaining enough fuel and energy to fight. Pilots who flew against it in Luftwaffe colors described the experience of seeing a formation of Mustangs descend from altitude with a specific feeling, the recognition that the air war was over. Not the battle, the war. The P-51 was manufactured in factories across America by workers who had never built an aircraft before, assembled with precision, and delivered in quantities the Luftwaffe could not replace or match. Over 15,000 were built. They flew with 27 different air forces. The Bearcat was more exciting to fly. The Hellcat won more Pacific kills. The Thunderbolt destroyed more ground targets. But the P-51 Mustang saved the strategic air campaign, the campaign that broke Germany's capacity to fight, and nothing else on this list can claim that. It isn't just the best American fighter of World War II. It is the aircraft that proved the war could be won from the sky. If you enjoyed this ranking of every American WW2 fighter, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Subscribe for more WW2 aircraft and military history rankings every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.